For 3 centuries, the galaxy whispered a single truth: when the predators marked a world, that world was already dead. They were not diplomats. They did not negotiate borders or trade routes. They evolved in gravity so crushing it warped bone and split mountains, on a world where only the most violent organisms survived long enough to reproduce. Their physiology was a monument to that history: dense skeletal lattices layered with shock-absorbing cartilage, redundant organs shielded behind overlapping rib plates, muscle fibers coiled like industrial cables. Their blood carried clotting agents so aggressive that battlefield wounds sealed in moments. Their eyes saw across multiple spectrums, reading heat and electromagnetic fluctuations with equal ease. They did not fear injury. Injury was proof of engagement. Their culture was simpler than their anatomy. Strength determined status. Survival determined virtue. Entire bloodlines were culled if weakness appeared. Young were raised in controlled hunts against engineered megafauna. Strategy was valued, but only insofar as it delivered domination. Mercy was considered evolutionary sabotage. When they entered interstellar space, they did not announce themselves. They tested their weapons on an isolated colony belonging to a minor trading species. The colony's defense grid lasted 17 minutes. The predators harvested data, bodies, and raw materials, then moved on. Within decades, they had dismantled civilizations that had existed for tens of thousands of years. A telepathic consortium once attempted to overwhelm them mentally. The predators responded by detonating a captured moon inside the consortium's home system, collapsing their psychic network in a storm of gravitational distortion. A machine empire calculated probabilities of resistance, and concluded victory was statistically impossible. They surrendered preemptively. The predators stripped their processing cores and integrated the computational frameworks into their own fleet coordination systems. They did not expand through diplomacy or ideology. They expanded through annihilation. Worlds that resisted were scoured to bedrock. Worlds that surrendered were stripped of resources and converted into breeding grounds or training arenas. Entire species were reduced to livestock, their genetic traits catalogued for potential military adaptation. The predators believed themselves the final product of natural selection, a species refined by violence into perfection. Across the galaxy, their name was rarely spoken directly. The Galactic Council, a coalition of advanced civilizations bound by mutual defense treaties, referred to them only as the apex host. Official reports avoided emotional language, but the subtext was clear: no fleet had ever defeated them in open battle. No coalition had survived a second engagement. Then long-range scans detected a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star at the fringe of map space. The species inhabiting it had only recently begun broadcasting radio signals. Their planetary network traffic revealed fragmentation, hundreds of languages, competing governments, economic disparity, internal conflicts. Their military technology relied on chemical propulsion and projectile weaponry. Their orbital infrastructure was sparse and poorly defended. Biological analysis suggested fragility. Thin skin. Limited natural armor. Slow regenerative capability. Average lifespan short compared to galactic norms. Their societies engaged in frequent internal wars despite possessing the intelligence to avoid them. From a predator perspective, they appeared self-destructive and inefficient. The Council quietly debated issuing a warning, but historical precedent offered no comfort. Any species that drew the predator's attention became a battlefield regardless of outside intervention. Several Council members advocated quarantining the system, hoping the predators would deem it strategically irrelevant. They did not. Predator reconnaissance drones entered the system without resistance. They cataloged Earth's defenses, intercepted military communications, and analyzed cultural media. The findings amused the warlords overseeing the expansion. Humans created fictional heroes to imagine strength they did not possess. They celebrated individual courage in the face of impossible odds. They romanticized rebellion. The Predator High Command interpreted this as psychological compensation for weakness. A fleet was dispatched, not the full might of their empire, but a calculated force sufficient to overwhelm a developing civilization. Warships the size of continents translated into the outer system, their hulls layered with adaptive armor grown from bioengineered alloys. Each vessel carried legions bred for planetary assault, veterans of campaigns that had ended species. On Earth, astronomers noticed anomalies at the edge of the solar system. Signals flickered across global networks. Governments scrambled to interpret incomplete data. Conspiracy forums ignited. Military satellites reoriented. No unified command existed to respond instantly. Humanity had never faced an external enemy. From orbit, the Predator Armada observed the blue world turning silently beneath white cloud bands. Oceans reflected starlight. Cities pulsed with electricity. Billions of heat signatures marked dense population centers. The warlords studied the data and reached the same conclusion their ancestors always had. This would be a harvest. They did not consider the possibility that prey might evolve teeth. The Predator fleet entered Earth's orbit expecting the familiar pattern: panic, fractured command structures, desperate broadcasts pleading for terms. Instead, the first thing they detected was silence. Global communication networks did not collapse. They hardened. Military satellites shifted into defensive constellations. Civilian aircraft were grounded within minutes. Strategic command centers went dark, not in surrender, but in encryption. The Predators transmitted a single message translated into the dominant global languages: submit. Disarm. Prepare for integration. No reply came. Across the planet, early warning systems synchronized between rival nations without negotiation. Data was shared automatically. Missile defense grids that had once been aimed at one another recalibrated toward orbit. Naval fleets dispersed from predictable formations into irregular patterns designed to complicate targeting. Underground bunkers sealed. Evacuation corridors opened in major cities with startling efficiency for a species so politically divided. The Predators initiated the first strike to establish dominance. Orbital lances targeted military installations, expecting catastrophic chain reactions. Several bases vanished in controlled firestorms. Yet the damage reports that followed unsettled the invasion command. Many facilities had been evacuated before impact. Decoys had drawn fire away from critical infrastructure. Power grids rerouted around severed nodes in seconds. Dropships pierced the atmosphere above multiple continents. Shock troops descended into dense urban centers, confident that terror would fracture resistance. Instead, they encountered coordinated defense. Human forces did not meet them in open fields. They collapsed bridges after Predator units crossed them. They funneled advanced squads into narrow streets pre-sited for crossfire. Anti-armor weapons designed for terrestrial warfare were modified on the fly to exploit weak points identified in Predator exoskeletal joints. Snipers targeted sensor clusters rather than mass, blinding opponents who relied on superior perception. When Predator warriors engaged at close range, they killed efficiently. Their strength shattered concrete barricades and hurled armored vehicles aside. But every push forward triggered layered contingencies. Retreating human units left behind remote explosives calibrated to detonate only after enemy armor signatures confirmed maximum concentration. Entire assault teams were vaporized and detonations triggered from blocks away. Predator commanders noted a deviation from previous campaigns. Humans did not break after initial losses. Casualty projections that should have induced collapse instead seemed to harden resistance. Emergency broadcasts carried instructions, not despair. Civilians were directed to shelters with rehearsed precision. Volunteer medical networks activated independently of government control. On the third day of ground engagement, a Predator strike detachment seized a metropolitan communication hub, intending to broadcast a live execution to enforce submission. Before the transmission could begin, the building's internal systems failed. Power conduits had been rewired to overload under foreign biometric triggers. The explosion collapsed the structure inward, burying the entire detachment beneath reinforced steel and concrete. No survivors were recovered. The loss was statistically minor by Predator standards. Yet it marked the first time in recorded expansion history that an invasion unit had been eliminated by a species categorized as pre-unified and technologically inferior. In orbit, human cyber warfare teams began probing Predator communication bands. Their initial attempts were crude, but persistent. Within hours, they isolated repeating command patterns. Within days, they injected false telemetry into localized channels. A Predator battalion advancing toward a coastal city received falsified reinforcement coordinates and moved directly into a kill zone established by artillery concealed within civilian architecture. Reports reaching the Predator flagship shifted in tone. Opposition described as primitive resistance was reclassified as adaptive hostility. Human forces displayed no centralized hive structure, yet operated with emergent cohesion. Individual units made autonomous decisions aligned with broader strategic outcomes. The Predators escalated. Heavier armor deployed. Atmospheric bombardment increased. Entire districts were reduced to rubble to eliminate cover. Human casualties climbed into the millions. Still, surrender codes never transmitted. Captured humans refused interrogation cooperation despite clear physical disadvantage. Some feigned compliance long enough to sabotage holding facilities from within. Others used concealed devices to destroy themselves and their captors simultaneously. For the first time, Predator field commanders issued a request rarely spoken in their war doctrine: reassessment. This species lacked physical superiority. It lacked unified governance. It lacked advanced propulsion and energy weapons. Yet it possessed something unmodeled in Predator conquest algorithms: unpredictable resilience amplified by improvisation. From orbit, Earth did not resemble a collapsing prey world. It resembled a system reconfiguring under pressure. The invasion had begun as a demonstration of inevitability. It was becoming a contest. Predator High Command completed its biological assessment of humanity within 72 hours. The conclusions were precise and, on the surface, reassuring. Humans were physically inferior in strength, reaction time, and natural armor. Their skeletal structure fractured under force levels a Predator could withstand effortlessly. Their sensory range was narrow. Their lifespan short. Their internal divisions chronic. Yet battlefield projections continued to diverge from expected outcomes. What the initial analysis failed to quantify was acceleration. Humans learned in real time. Within days of the first destroyed dropships, recovery teams dismantled alien propulsion cores in underground laboratories. Scientists who had previously competed for grants now shared data across borders without restriction. Civilian engineers were integrated into military think tanks. Academic rivalries dissolved under existential pressure. Every captured fragment of Predator alloy, every severed armor plate, every damaged weapons system became a research breakthrough waiting to happen. Human metallurgy adapted first. Predator armor relied on layered bioalloys that redistributed kinetic force. Human researchers identified resonance frequencies within those layers and modified existing munitions to exploit vibrational stress points. Weapons once considered obsolete were recalibrated and redeployed with devastating effect. Predator infantry units that had shrugged off artillery in earlier engagements began suffering localized structural failures in their protective plating. Reverse engineering extended beyond materials. Predator battlefield networks relied on encrypted bursts optimized for hierarchical command. Human cyber units mapped traffic patterns rather than code structures, identifying timing intervals that revealed command nodes. Instead of brute force decryption, they injected latency and phantom acknowledgments, subtly distorting coordination. Predator squads began arriving seconds too late, turning synchronized assaults into fragmented advances. Adaptation was not confined to laboratories. On the ground, human tactics evolved hourly. Units rotated between urban, rural, and subterranean combat environments to force Predator troops into unfamiliar terrain. Sewer systems became mobility corridors. High-altitude teams exploited thinner atmospheres where Predator physiology, optimized for dense gravity wells, required recalibration. Environmental manipulation replaced direct confrontation. Psychology emerged as humanity's most disruptive weapon. Predator doctrine assumed fear as a primary destabilizer. Humans acknowledged fear, then acted regardless. Combat footage circulated globally, not as propaganda of invincibility but as proof of resistance. Fallen soldiers were memorialized publicly, transforming loss into collective resolve rather than despair. Volunteer enlistment surged despite rising casualty numbers. Predators began encountering behaviors that contradicted every prior conquest model. Isolated human squads launched diversionary attacks against superior forces with no expectation of survival, solely to draw units away from civilian evacuation routes. Medical teams operated within artillery range to retrieve the wounded under continuous bombardment. Engineers sabotaged infrastructure moments before capture, denying tactical advantage even at personal cost. Emotional bonds amplified endurance. Humans did not fight for abstract dominance, they fought for specific names, faces, and memories. Predator interrogators observed that threats against planetary leadership yielded minimal reaction, but threats against family units triggered explosive defiance. Protective instinct operated as a force multiplier beyond rational risk assessment. Simultaneously, humans began shifting from defense to disruption. Small, retrofitted spacecraft armed with modified Predator energy cells conducted hit-and-run strikes against supply transports at the edge of the system. These vessels were crude compared to Predator cruisers, yet their unpredictability compensated for technological gaps. They targeted logistics rather than warships, eroding the steady flow of reinforcement that underpinned Predator supremacy. In orbit, debris fields grew thicker. Predator commanders adjusted formations, only to find humans adapting again, altering attack vectors, exploiting blind spots and shield harmonics identified through cumulative observation. Each engagement provided new data. Each loss refined strategy. The most unsettling development emerged from captured Predator weaponry integrated into human exocets. Engineers combined alien power sources with terrestrial control systems, producing hybrid platforms piloted by soldiers trained to exploit flexibility rather than raw strength. These units did not attempt to match Predator power, they compensated with agility, leveraging faster decision cycles and decentralized command. Predator after-action reports began including an unfamiliar variable: escalation through learning. No prior species had demonstrated such rapid synthesis under sustained assault. Most civilizations required generational shifts to reconfigure military doctrine. Humans condensed that transformation into weeks. The war ceased resembling a traditional invasion. It became an adaptive arms race, and humanity appeared uniquely suited to thrive within it. Their fragility forced creativity. Their diversity generated parallel solutions to identical problems. Their internal conflicts, once perceived as weakness, had cultivated strategic plurality. Predator warlords recognized the shift but miscalculated its trajectory. They interpreted human adaptation as desperation amplified by survival instinct, expecting eventual exhaustion. They failed to recognize a deeper pattern. Pressure did not degrade humanity. It refined it. By the second month of invasion, the strategic balance shifted in a way the Predators had never experienced. Their doctrine relied on decisive shock followed by systematic eradication. Instead, they faced a conflict stretching beyond projected timelines, draining resources at an accelerating rate. Human resistance had matured into coordinated counteroffensive. A unified planetary command structure emerged, not through political consolidation but through necessity. Military leaders who once guarded national interests now operated from shared intelligence hubs. Decision cycles shortened dramatically. Authorization chains compressed. Tactical innovations moved from prototype to deployment in days rather than years. Human forces stopped reacting and began dictating tempo. Orbital defense platforms, constructed from repurposed satellite arrays and reinforced with salvaged alien shielding, created lethal corridors in near-Earth space. Predator ships entering low orbit encountered overlapping fields of fire calibrated to exploit weaknesses in their defensive harmonics. Even glancing hits disrupted internal power distribution, forcing vessels to withdraw for recalibration. Simultaneously, humans targeted logistics. Long-range strikes intercepted supply carriers before they reached staging positions. Instead of confronting capital warships head-on, human pilots attacked fuel reserves, ammunition transports, and communication relays. Predator fleets, built for overwhelming dominance, struggled when forced into sustained attrition without uninterrupted reinforcement. On planetary surfaces, Predator battalions discovered that territory gain no longer translated into control. Cities previously reduced to rubble became traps. Underground manufacturing cells produced weapons from scrap and alien debris. Civilian populations relocated into decentralized enclaves beyond predictable targeting grids. Infrastructure adapted faster than bombardment could neutralize it. Predator morale indicators began fluctuating. Casualty rates exceeded historical norms for campaigns against technologically inferior species. More troubling was the emergence of hesitation. Reports documented split-second pauses before advancing into confined spaces, delays in pursuing retreating human units, increased reliance on heavy bombardment rather than close engagement. Humans exploited that hesitation ruthlessly. Close-quarters combat units equipped with hybrid exocets engaged Predator shock troops directly. They avoided brute contests of strength, focusing instead on mobility and joint vulnerability. Coordinated teams disabled larger opponents through synchronized strikes, leveraging battlefield awareness amplified by real-time data feeds. Predator warriors, conditioned to dominate through superior force, found themselves dismantled by precision and cooperation. In orbit, a decisive engagement unfolded when Human Command identified the flagship coordinating regional operations. Rather than concentrate firepower in a single assault, they executed layered disruption. Cyber units injected corrupted navigational updates. Long-range kinetic strikes targeted external sensor arrays. Swarms of autonomous drones, constructed from civilian manufacturing networks, saturated defensive systems and forced shield cycling at irregular intervals. When the flagship attempted repositioning, concealed mass driver platforms launched tungsten projectiles accelerated to relativistic velocities. The impacts compromised structural integrity along pre-mapped stress seams identified from prior engagements. Internal explosions cascaded through command decks. The vessel did not disintegrate instantly. It tore itself apart in stages, systems failing in visible sequence before the core ruptured in orbit. The destruction of that command ship reverberated across Predator channels. For the first time in recorded expansion history, a central war authority had been eliminated by a target species. Retreat orders, once unthinkable, entered tactical consideration. On the ground, Predator units awaiting reinforcement received fragmented signals. Confusion replaced certainty. Human forces intensified pressure during that instability, launching coordinated assaults across multiple continents to stretch remaining enemy formations thin. What had begun as survival transformed into calculated pursuit. Predator evacuation craft attempted extraction under continuous harassment from improvised anti-orbital batteries. Some escaped. Many did not. Burning hulls streaked through atmosphere as symbols of a collapsing campaign. The psychological inversion was complete. Predator soldiers who had once inspired universal dread now moved cautiously through contested zones, aware they were being observed, studied, and targeted. Humans tracked their patterns, anticipated responses, and countered before execution. The hunters no longer dictated the battlefield. They endured it. And as their fleet formations contracted beyond effective range, a realization crystallized within Predator Command archives. A species categorized as fragile had not merely resisted extinction. It had learned how to dismantle inevitability. When the last Predator vessels withdrew beyond the outer edge of the solar system, no victory parades followed. Earth's orbit was a graveyard of fractured hulls and drifting debris, silent monuments to a war that had nearly erased humanity. Cities lay scarred. Entire coastlines were reshaped by bombardment. Casualty lists stretched into numbers too large for comprehension. Survival had come at unbearable cost. Humanity did not celebrate. It consolidated. Emergency governments transitioned into a permanent planetary defense coalition. Former rivals signed accords not out of idealism, but clarity. Division had nearly doomed them. Coordination had preserved them. Research facilities expanded rather than closed. Salvaged Predator technology was cataloged, refined, and integrated into a new generation of defensive architecture. Orbital platforms multiplied. Deep space sensor arrays extended humanity's vision beyond its own system. The message was unspoken but universal: never again would Earth be caught unprepared. Across the galaxy, shockwaves traveled faster than any fleet. The Galactic Council confirmed what no species had believed possible. The apex host had retreated. Not strategically repositioned. Not temporarily delayed. Driven back. Records were amended. Threat classifications rewritten. Historical archives updated to include a single unprecedented entry: Predator flagship destroyed in open conflict by emergent civilization. Species that had hidden in fear began emerging from isolation. Worlds once stripped of autonomy initiated revolts within Predator-controlled territories. Supply worlds withheld resources. Enslaved populations sabotaged garrisons. The illusion of invincibility, once shattered, could not be restored. Predator command networks fractured under simultaneous uprisings. Their empire, built on intimidation and absolute dominance, lacked the diplomatic infrastructure to stabilize dissent. Subjugated systems did not negotiate. They rebelled. Within Predator territory, strategic councils debated retaliation. Pride demanded renewed assault. Survival metrics advised caution. They had encountered resistance before, but never adaptive escalation of this magnitude. Humanity had not relied on superior force. It had exploited every weakness, every assumption, every rigid element of Predator doctrine. For the first time, expansion halted. Earth's reputation transformed almost overnight. Galactic observers analyzed combat recordings, psychological profiles, and tactical evolutions. Conclusions converged on a singular assessment: humans were not the strongest species. They were not the most advanced. They were not unified by nature. They were adaptive under pressure to a degree previously undocumented. Human psychology became a subject of intense study. Their willingness to endure catastrophic loss without systemic collapse defied standard behavioral projections. Their emotional bonds, once dismissed as inefficiencies, functioned as structural reinforcement during crisis. Grief translated into determination. Fear converted into preparation. Diversity produced innovation rather than fragmentation when faced with existential threat. Exploratory envoys approached Earth cautiously, not to dominate but to understand. Humanity responded with guarded diplomacy. They did not demand tribute. They did not pursue conquest of weakened Predator systems. They fortified their borders and extended measured alliances. The war had altered them. Military academies incorporated alien doctrine analysis into training curricula. Civilian education systems integrated planetary defense awareness as foundational knowledge. Scientific collaboration across continents became permanent rather than temporary. Space exploration accelerated, not from curiosity alone, but from strategic necessity. In distant sectors, Predator commanders monitored humanity's expansion into nearby systems. Each probe, each defensive outpost, each newly armed vessel reinforced a sobering calculation. If humans could achieve such transformation within weeks under invasion, what might they accomplish in decades of uninterrupted development? The answer remained uncertain. What was certain was this: the galaxy's definition of apex had changed. Power was no longer measured solely by mass, armor density, or casualty ratios inflicted. It was measured by resilience, learning velocity, and the capacity to convert vulnerability into leverage. The Predators had believed themselves the final stage of evolution, a species perfected by violence. They had encountered a species perfected by adaptation. Earth's skies, once filled with descending warships, now carried defensive fleets forged from salvaged wreckage and human ingenuity. The scars remained visible from orbit, but so did the infrastructure of a civilization unwilling to bow. The galaxy adjusted to a new constant. Humanity did not seek dominion. But it would never again be prey.